Hello everyone, my name is Marcus and welcome to my new video. In the last video I talked about my 8 years with the original Leica M-D, which was released in 2016 when I bought this camera, and I own it since then. In that video, I also briefly touched upon the Leica M10-D, which is its successor, but it was based on the Leica M10 model at the time. Just a few days ago, though, Leica released this M11-D, the latest camera in the line of digital M cameras without a display in the back. This one is based on the Leica M11-P, and I think this release is reason enough to continue the discussion from the last video. But before I go into details and we have a closer look at the camera and compare it also to the original Leica M-D, I want to send a big shout out to the Leica store team here in Zurich, who were so kind to lend me this camera for a short while. Without them, this video would not have been possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, without further ado, let's get started. First and foremost, I want to say that this is not a technical video, nor a general review. In this video, I want to share my personal thoughts on the Leica M11-D from the perspective of a long-term owner of the original Leica M-D, and whose main digital camera is the Leica M-D. When I look at the M11-D, I immediately see that it follows the design language and the idea of the original Leica M-D. This was not the case with the Leica M10-D, which was pretty much a Leica M10 with the back screen erased and a strange thumb rest. Other than that, it was, from a control perspective, exactly an M10. And that always gave me the feeling that the M10-D was more of a, let's call it an afterthought, that was produced as cheaply as possible or with the least amount of effort. So I'm very happy and pleased to see that Leica went back to this original idea of the Leica M-D, and it has its dedicated body, where they erased the ISO dial, which is usually up here since the Leica M10, and they moved it back here where it is also with the original Leica M-D and the analog camera. So this camera for sure is a lot more an homage to the analog days. The only thing where Leica cut some corners with this design, and I had to notice this as a long-term owner of the original Leica M-D, is right up here where the on and off button is. So here it is truly just an on and off button, whereas with the original Leica M-D, I hope you see this on camera, this is not just an on and off button, but also a selector if you want to shoot in single picture mode, continuous shooting, or if you want to use the self-timer. So Leica removed that from this design. So this is really, again, this is then a copy of how the Leica M11 is. And yeah, so that's the only thing that I realized where they maybe cut some corners. And I will talk a little bit more about this because this comes into play when it comes to usability, and you will see that in a moment. When it comes to shooting, I can say that I felt immediately very familiar with this camera. All the dials and controls are in the places where I'm used to, so everything came absolutely natural to me. From a visual perspective, this camera is more stealthy than the original Leica M-D. For example, the metal here around the hot shoe is now black. The function button is also in black, and the ISO dial is also kept in black. Let me quickly show you the Leica M-D in comparison. So here we have silvery metal around the hot shoe. We have a silver looking function button, and the ISO dial in the back is also kept in silver. So overall, yes, the Leica M11-D is more stealthy. The color itself also is a different kind of black. I don't know if you see it on camera. The Leica M-D here, the original one, is kept in that so-called black paint, whereas the Leica M11-D has a more matte kind of finish and an interesting texture if you go with the finger over the texture. Then this camera is also a lot more quiet. So this shutter is the shutter of the new M11-P. It's a very pleasant sound. I like it a lot. And the camera is also a lot lighter. I would say more than 100 grams lighter than the original Leica M-D. It's also thinner. I think since the M11-D, the dimensions here are pretty much like with the Leica M6, so the analog Leica cameras. But overall, I really like the look, I really like the feel. Shooting with it was a lot of fun, and I'm happy to say that the new Leica M11-D kept the soul of the original Leica M-D. Let me now walk you through the new features of the Leica M11-D compared to the original Leica M-D. So first, obviously, it has the Leica M11 sensor, an incredible 60 megapixel sensor that produces amazing photos. You wouldn't believe what comes out of this camera. Also, what we have now is auto ISO. So basically, the camera can choose the ISO value automatically. The original Leica M-D didn't have that. The Leica M10-D already had this function, as well as support for EVF. So here on top in the hot shoe, you can plug in an electronic viewfinder if you prefer to have live view, or maybe in some lower level situations, or if you struggle with focusing. This certainly helps. Then the camera also has an internal storage of 256 gigabytes, right? So for me personally, this would probably be enough storage. I don't know if I would need an SD card, other than if I would want it as a backup to have the camera to write the photos I'm taking to the internal storage and the SD card at the same time, just as a backup. But you have various configuration options here, so this is amazing. As I already mentioned, the camera is also lighter and thinner than the original Leica M-D. Then what is also a very nice feature is they introduced USB charging with the Leica M11. This is very practical, especially when you travel, and you can also download the photos through the USB port down here. And then last but not least, you now have connectivity to the Leica's Photos app. The Leica M10-D also had that already. With the Photos app, you can configure now certain things that was not possible with the original Leica M-D. So for example, you can configure the metering mode. You can configure the white balance. And you can configure, for example, if you want to have, or if you want to shoot RAW only, or RAW and JPEG, or JPEG only. With the original Leica M-D, these values were basically hard-coded, so the white balance was set to auto. You could only shoot in RAW format, so there was no JPEG. And the metering mode was set to center weighted. So that's basically it. You can configure now all these things in the app. And then there is one brand new feature that the M10-D also didn't have and was introduced with the M11-P, and that is that you can now digitally sign your photos through Leica content credentials. I think that is very important, and I really love that that feature made it to the Leica M11-D. But that's pretty much it when it comes to new features compared to the Leica M-D. Although we have all these amazing new features, there is one big but, and that is that the Leica M11-D relies on the connectivity to the Leica Photos app for certain functions that were there to configure on camera directly with the original Leica M-D. And I was already hinting towards that in the beginning of the video when I told you that this switch up here is only, in quotes, an on and off switch. Whereas with the original Leica M-D, this was a mode selector. So you could set it to off, single shooting, continuous shooting, and self-timer. So if you want to switch between these modes on the Leica M11-D, you would have to fire up your Leica Photos app on the cell phone set the mode you want to shoot in, and then continue shooting. And whenever you want to switch the mode again, you would have to fire up the Leica Photos app. If I am wrong, please correct me in the comment section below, but I didn't find out how to do that without the Leica Photos app. Nonetheless, if this is the only but of this camera, then we can say this is an amazing camera, and this is a dream for photographers like me. Yeah, that's all I can say. This is really a truly amazing camera. So the big question now is, for who is this camera? Let me first start by talking about existing Leica M-D and M10-D owners. Let me start with Leica M10-D owners. This might sound controversial, but here we go. I would say for Leica M10-D owners, this is a step up from a technical perspective, from a usability perspective, and from a feeling perspective. If you have the means to get a Leica M11-D, go for it. I would say this is the better camera in pretty much all aspects. For those who own the original Leica M-D, I would also say that this is technically the better camera, with the big new upgrades being the sensor, the support for an electronic viewfinder, auto ISO, and the control of white balance through the Leica Photos app. But if you can live without these features, the decision to upgrade to a Leica M11-D, I think, is not so straightforward, because you can get the same feeling when shooting with the original Leica M-D, and if you ask me, I think it feels even a little bit more analog, if you prefer that. Also, one big advantage of the Leica M-D is everything you need for shooting with that camera, you can do directly on camera without relying on an external app or connectivity to your phone. So how about everyone else? So for sure, the Leica M11-D is not for everyone. If you want to get a better idea what shooting with a Leica M-D is about, please watch my previous video. I think it will answer a lot of your questions. And I also obviously touched upon a couple of points in this video, but we can safely say that this is a niche product for very specific photographic needs. When it comes to professionals and Leica M-D, M10-D, M11-D, I think many professionals will stay away from this camera. This one is a Leica M11P. If you approach photography like with any normal digital Leica M, and I think the back screen just gives you some certainty. You really want to shoot differently if you're in the market for a Leica M11D. Everything I shared in this video are my personal opinions from a perspective of a long-term Leica M-D shooter. Your mileage may very well vary, so please keep this in mind when you watch this video. Overall, I must say this is an amazing camera, and I hope that one day I can own one and add it next to my original Leica M-D. I'm very grateful to Leica that they kept developing the Leica M-D lineup, and I really hope that they continue to do so in the future. I think this is a noteworthy development, and it represents a new chapter in Leica's ongoing dedication to the art of photography. Thanks for watching.